Hi folks. We're nearly halfway through season 4 and the feedback this season has been great. Things are starting to get quite busy for me now with my full-time job, but I will do my best to continue with the release schedule. I work as a driver guide, giving private tours of Ireland. This summer I'll actually be touring with some people who got in touch with me after listening to the podcast. So I'm looking forward to spending a few days with listeners. If you're looking for a private driver guide for luxury tours of Ireland, please feel free to reach out to me at troublespodcast@gmail.com. Now, enough of that. Let's get into the show. It's 1979, and John Crawley has just finished his first enlistment in the Marine Corps. They'd wanted him to stay, but John refused. His sole intention was to return to Ireland and join the Provisional IRA. But upon finally joining the paramilitary group, John realised that things were not as he expected, and it wasn't long before he would be sent back to the USA to purchase guns and rub shoulders with the organised crime outfit in Boston. This is the story of the Yank, John Crawley. This is the Troubles Podcast, a podcast about the violence and bloodshed that occurred in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain, as multiple sides and organisations waged a bloody conflict over the status of Northern Ireland. Just a heads up that the main source for this episode is John Crawley's book, The Yank, which was released in 2022, published by Merrion Press. In this episode, I'll also be talking to John himself, and you will hear my voice in the background. It's important to remember that most of this episode is told from his perspective and should be viewed as such. He uses words which some may be unfamiliar with. He says provos when referring to the Provisional IRA, and he also calls the Irish War of Independence the Tan War. Tan is a derogatory term for an English person. So let's get into it then. John Crawley was born on Long Island in New York in 1957. Both of his parents were Irish immigrants, with his father hailing from Roscommon and his mother from Kerry. I'll hand it over to John now.
My father at the time was in the US Air Force. He joined for a 4-year stint to get some technical training, but mostly to accelerate his American citizenship, which you could do at the time. So he was actually in the Air Force when I was born. But we moved to Chicago when I was about 2, so I don't remember New York or Long Island at all. I basically grew up in Chicago, went to Catholic schools there with mostly other Irish American kids. We originally lived on Central Avenue in the city of Chicago. We moved out to Norridge and then Melrose Park. But when I was 13, I spent an entire summer in Ireland. And then when I was 14, I moved here. I was asked my parents, would I consider moving to Ireland? I loved the summer I was in Ireland, and I said yes, I would move. So I went to school in Ireland in County Roscommon for a year, same school my father went to. And then I lived with an aunt and a farm. So it was quite a leap to go from a split level bungalow in Chicago to, Ireland, where at the time there was no central heating and we had to go down every day to get the water from the well and milk cows. It was quite a
rural change, I guess.
Yeah, it was a big change, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then about a year later, my parents moved over. They had to settle their American affairs. So we moved to Dublin and I went to school in Dublin.
John explained that from an early age, the sole thing he wanted to do in life was to join the IRA. I asked him many times about this tunnel vision, and he explained that perhaps if he was in a relationship or had a career that he wanted, he may have stayed in the US.
Well, I was determined. I mean, I wasn't fanatical. I mean, I remember going to the States to join the Marines. I remember thinking, things could happen over here. I could maybe meet a girl. I could get career opportunities that would deflect me from coming home again. But no, I was determined to come home. And see, when I got away from Ireland, I got away from the incessant anti-Republican propaganda, especially from RTE and the Irish Independent and all that. When I got away from that, and I was able to get a bit of space to do my own study, my own thinking, my own research, I came more and more to the conclusion that the Republican analysis of Britain's role in Ireland was the correct one. So I became even more determined to join. So while I went to join the Marines with a determination to come home, or a inclination to come home, and join the IRA, it became a deep determination while I was in the Marines to do so. And I was a voracious reader. And again, having grown up in the United States, growing up in a republic where every morning you pledge allegiance to the flag, and there's words like the republic for which it stands, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Those words would have resonated with me, and I believed Ireland should have the same.
He probably would have joined the IRA at the age of 18, but he didn't know anyone involved.
Sure. Well, I was in South Dublin. I went to a rugby playing school in St. Lawrence's, and there wasn't a lot of IRA people around. And as I say in the book, the IRA doesn't have recruiting offices. I would have considered joining them at 18.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anybody in the IRA.
Yeah, so you just kind of said you'd go and come back.
Yeah. And I thought then, if I'm serious, I will come back. And if I'm not serious, then, no harm done.
John's plan was simple. He wanted to get military training in the USA and then bring those skills to the IRA and to become a paramilitary.
Well, my logic was to enhance my professional development and to test my commitment. I knew if I went away for 4 years and still came back and joined, that I was committed to it. I wanted to test that. I wanted to mature a bit and to enhance my own professional development. But I didn't have an intention to come home and join the IRA with a view to making it more professional and more sophisticated, because I really believed all the hype I was hearing that the IRA was the most professional, the most sophisticated guerrilla group in the world. And of course, I was hearing all this from the British. And so that's what I did. I joined the Marines. I joined an elite recon unit, which would be the special operations group in the US Marines. I became an instructor, and I made sergeant in only 3 years. So I could have had a sterling career in the Marines. I mean, they asked me to learn Chinese they asked me, which I refused. Then they asked me to go to the US Naval Academy in Annapolis to become an officer, and I refused that.
Then they asked you Russian as well, wasn't it?
Well, when I said no to Chinese, 2 weeks later, they asked me would I learn Russian, and I said no. So they never asked me again.
They stopped knocking.
They stopped that. Yeah. So, but you say I didn't intend to make it a career. I intended to come home, and I did. I got out of the Marine Corps on the 8th of May, on the 29th of May, 1979, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was in a connecting flight home for Ireland. I found out there was a fella who'd been in Portlaoise prison, and he'd been in the IRA. So he's the only guy that I actually knew had been in the IRA. So I got work. He was renovating a building. I got work there for a while. A cousin of mine knew him. So I got work there for a while, and he rapidly gasped my intentions because obviously of the way I latched onto him, the questions I was asking.
Yeah.
And, I eventually, broached it with him after a couple of weeks that I'd like to join the IRA. And he tried to discourage me, actually. He actually told me he didn't believe that the leadership in Belfast or Derry could be trusted. But he didn't go into why, and I brushed it off as an excuse by somebody who'd retired from the struggle and was trying to excuse, his own retirement from it.
Now, do you think he was saying that because of informers, or do you think it was a different reason?
I think it was a different reason. I think
it was too early. Yeah, it was a bit too early.
Yeah, I think the reason might have been he suspected the direction it might go, that it wouldn't go towards Republican goals, but towards maybe electoral careers and that. That's a sense I had later talking to him. But
okay.
At that time, the IRA didn't know how riddled with informers the IRA was. You know what I mean?
Eventually, John was approached by a man from County Tyrone who understood that he was interested in joining the paramilitary group.
He told somebody, and a Tyrone man approached me, and I went through a few weeks of, lectures, and he'd have been in the IRA. I wasn't quite sure at the time if he was or not, but I suspected he was. And so I had some interviews and some lectures, and they checked out my background and things like that. And eventually I was sworn in.
I asked John what the process of getting sworn in was like.
Well, you have to read the Green Book, which is the IRA Constitution. And basically it's called being Green Booked. And basically then once you're accepted, you just swear an oath. I think I have the words of it. It's very short, that you'll obey the rules of the organization and commands from any officers. That's basically it,
And does it come with a celebration? Do you go out in the booze in the evening, or is it a very solemn affair?
No, it wasn't solemn. It was very matter of fact. And that's it then. You're a volunteer, so then you kind of have to hang about and wonder what next,
John explains that a paramilitary group is quite different from being in a military force, and it was a lot more self-motivated rather than simply following orders.
I often hear people saying, the IRA sent you out to do this and do that. The IRA don't really send anybody out to do anything. It's very much initiative. It was very initiative driven. And if you, a lot of it depended on how good or bad the local commander was. If you had a good and active local commander, and it was the same in the Tan War, if you had a proactive commander who was good, had technical competence, tactical ability, you could be part of an effective unit, and in other areas you mightn't be.
But anything suggested would have to get approval from the top, or no?
No, not everything.
Okay.
Not everything. You knew what not to do.
Yeah. Don't risk civilians in the Republic of Ireland, that sort of stuff.
That type of thing. Yeah, you knew what not to do. Some bigger operations later on, I think in 1986, they had to be cleared by Northern Command, but that turned out to be a potentially dangerous thing, because now you had people involved. You see, the IRA was supposed to have this cell system, right? And it was all hyped up. But, Raymond Gilmore in Derry, when he went Supergrass, he put 100 people in the dock.
100 people, wow.
Yeah, and Christopher Black had in Belfast had something like 23 people sent to prison. So
just to explain to the listeners, the reason the IRA moved to kind of this individual cell system where everyone knew their role in an operation but not the whole operation. This was specifically to avoid for informers.
And infiltration, and the thing about it is, you say you had 4 to 6 men in a cell, and nobody outside. Nobody in that cell knows anybody else, nobody in another cell, except the officer commanding, the man in charge might know somebody higher up. But the thing about it is, you see, what screwed that up a lot was you could have, for example, it was well known that when Scappaticci, who was an agent, was head of the Irish Security Department, and was actually a British agent at the time, when something went wrong, like, for example, at Loch Gall, when we had 8 men killed in an ambush. Yeah, so they sent Scappaticci in to do the investigation. The IRA does, and Scappaticci is a British agent. So right away, he's able to investigate and ask questions about who did this, who did that, who was involved, what houses did you use. Like, the British were able to find out absolutely everything. So to be honest with you, there was this theory of a cell system, but there was tight centralized control from the top that made really the cell system redundant and totally ineffective. So it was great in theory, but it didn't really work in practice. And the British had a huge overview of the whole IRA because they had agents in there.
We then started talking about informers and the role they played throughout the Troubles.
One of the strange thing about informing is, when I joined the IRA, I thought an informer would be a very furtive, nervous person who would be, at any minute, think.
Yeah, like a mousy. No, they're the loudest person in the room, aren't they?
No, that's what I found. That was amazing. Yeah. Because they knew they were protected, some of them really, really took to it. I mean, they absolutely thrived on being an informer, on the feeling that they were James Bond, and also some of them who absorbed the role. I know a friend of mine who interrogated an informer at one stage, and the informer said, "I wasn't a tout." He says, "I was an agent." You know what I mean?
Yeah, the sense of bravado.
The Brits played up. Oh no, you're not an informer. You're an agent. And you're running circles around these guys. And you're running rings around these guys. And you're so much smarter than everybody else. And the other thing was, then I found, is that people like Scappaticci, from what I heard, had a real swagger about them, a real confident swagger, and that actually built up their credibility and prestige even higher, because people looked at these guys and said, "God, this guy is fearless, and he's got swagger, and he's got confidence." And in a strange sort of way, but of course he did, because he knew he was untouchable. He was never going to be shot or go to prison, And
he never was.
Yeah, it's a real psychological game. It really is,
So now John is behind the veil, and he's a member of the IRA. I asked him if things were different than what he expected.
It was because I found out it wasn't quite the sophisticated professional force that I thought. Some areas like South Armagh were very effective, but in a lot of other areas, volunteers had no professional military training, and my biggest surprise was at the top how much, at Army Council level and leadership level, how little training was valued. I even heard members of the IRA leadership say that you could train a monkey to shoot. but like, we learned in the Marines, you might teach a monkey to point and pull, but you can't teach sight picture, sight alignment, trigger control. And you certainly can't teach monkeys to move, shoot, and communicate as part of a cohesive professional military team.
So on the side of the IRA, it was once you were in, once you're in this, once you join, that's it. Like there's no military training, there's no military drills, there's very little.
No, you could go to a camp and learn maybe where to put the magazine into the rifle in houses and that. And then maybe at dawn, boys might go out to a forestry and fire a few shots. But it was very rudimentary, very basic, and practically little or no training in tactics, how to move, how to operate as a unit. Basically, I found that a lot of IRA units were basically more heavily armed civilians than really cohesive military force. And there was no need for it, because it's just as easy to train people the right way as the wrong way, I believe. And if you bring people down to an area and you're going to train them for a couple of days, it's just as easy to teach them the right way as the wrong way. But I found that there wasn't that respect. Now I have to say, at the ground level, at the active service unit level, men were very keen to learn, very keen to train, and wanted the best training possible.
But there's no facilities in place for them to
but it wasn't even that there wasn't facilities. There wasn't the direction from the leadership to train that way. Training wasn't respected or given the appropriate emphasis it should have been, like it would have been done in the Marines. You know what I mean? And another thing I found was sometimes IRA men would say to me, well, you were in the Marines, but we're not a conventional army, and that training wouldn't suit us. But they wouldn't even wait to see what training I was talking about. Like, I knew the IRA wasn't going to call in artillery and airstrikes. I knew we weren't going to parachute out of planes, but there was a lot of training that would transfer, because in marksmanship and that the laws of physics are the laws of physics, whether you're a professional special forces unit or a civilian resistance group. I mean, the laws of ballistics are still the same.
Yeah, well, you were talking about the rifles. The vast majority of the IRA guns, the sights weren't scoped, I guess, which is something you do before making a gun shootable, I guess.
Yeah, well, I met quite a few IRA volunteers who thought you just put the scope on the rifle, as in in the movies. Yeah. But they have to be zeroed and calibrated and adjusted for various ranges, And so, yeah, that really did surprise me. Now, in fairness, it wasn't the IRA leadership who ever said to me they were the best trained, most professional force in the world. It was the British who were always saying that.
Yeah, it was the image that was painted.
It was the image the British wanted to paint to them. And I think part of it was for some reason, they wanted to enhance the prestige of some members of the IRA leadership. And it did, because...
It's an interesting take.
Yeah, it did. No, it did, because, volunteers would say, well, this guy... I don't want to name names, but this guy or that guy, even the Brits admit he's he's one of our top men and, one of our most, and that would give them a lot of prestige,
John also spent some time with Martin McGuinness and met him a number of times. He was a leader of the Provisional IRA during the Troubles, who would then go on to become Deputy First Minister a decade after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. McGuinness certainly needs an episode, and was a very polarising figure during the Troubles. I asked John how he felt on the occasions he met McGuinness.
He betrayed the hard man image to hard men. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He betrayed another image to other men. What the real image is, I don't know, but I do know that he was able to maintain his leadership of the movement for many, 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 many years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think in the fullness of time things will become clearer, but at the moment it's still it's still, things are a bit opaque.
It's still a bit too recent, to be honest. A lot of the people that I talk to, there's a lot they'd like to say, but it's still a little bit too recent to be history, I think, in a lot of cases.
I'm the same. There's a lot I could say, but I mean, in my book now, when I wrote a memoir, I mean, my main problem was, how can I write this without incriminating me or anybody else? And I hope I've managed to do that. Now, I do mention Martin McGuinness, but what I say to him is the truth from my perspective, but it's also Martin McGuinness, unfortunately, and I'm sorry to say, has passed away, so he can't be incriminated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, I could have mentioned many other people, but I don't for that specific reason. I'm not going to incriminate anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Well, sure, look at the Boston College tapes and all that sort of stuff,
Perhaps in the fullness of time, more things will come out. And I think when they do come out, I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching and re-examination of positions. But at the moment, this is where we are.
We then started talking about the different brigades of the IRA, and I put the question to John, what determined a good brigade?
Leadership on the ground. Yeah, absolutely. A dynamic leadership on the ground. It certainly wasn't from the leadership at the top. It was, if you got an area, it was like Tom Berry in West Cork, and other areas in the Tan War. If you got a good leader who led from the front and had that charisma and that combination of intelligence and courage, you had tended to have very effective units. It was really all about leadership, because the lads were there. In every part of Ireland, there were young men willing to fight, willing to take great risks, but they needed leadership, and when they got leadership, they performed very well.
Yeah, and that's what they say about South Armagh. Like, it was one of the only brigades in the IRA that they just didn't have informers. It was that tight knit. Now, of course, right. they may have, but.
Well, towards the end, I believe they were infiltrated towards the very end. But at their height in the early 70s and through most of the 80s, they basically were the only area unit that basically they beat the British Army in their area. I mean, the British Army were completely pinned down. Whereas in other areas, literally, the IRA were on the run from the British. In South Armagh, the British were on the run from the IRA.
From basically, was it just 2 sniper rivals? I think it was.
Well, it was more than that. I mean.
No, but it was, but it caused chaos.
Yeah, the Barrett 50 rifle. Yeah, but I mean, their ability to use it. I mean, the ability to go into the hardest of hard areas and take on the hardest. I mean, you got to remember, the South Armagh IRA fought the British Army. I mean, there was no UDR or RUC or anything down there, really. It was the British Army they were fighting.
Yeah, it's purely the Army.
Yeah, and they put up a terrific resistance. And I believe if one more area in the north had achieved their level of ability, I think the British Army in Ireland, in the north of Ireland, would have been stretched beyond its operational limit. And the British made tremendous efforts to make sure that didn't happen.
We didn't talk about it during this interview, but John mentions in his book about his first gun attack as a member of the Provisional IRA. John had travelled to Northern Ireland to visit a friend who lived in a village just north of the border, where there was a lot of British Army activity. John's friend was, quote, determined to have a crack at them, referring to the British soldiers, but after sustaining a shin injury on his farm, John's friend wasn't able to go with him, so John decided to go anyway. His plan was to traverse a number of fields in the hours before dawn, so that he could set up near a road where a British Army patrol would pass. He would then try and shoot as many soldiers as possible. John made the traverse and then got into position and accidentally drifted off to sleep. When he woke, a British Army foot patrol was off in the distance straight in front of him, in what he called his kill zone. The soldiers had stopped to search a car right in his line of sight. The search was completed and the driver drove away. John saw his chance. He aimed at one of the soldiers and pulled the trigger. John then describes in his book what happened next. The man folded onto the ground after being struck in the chest by the bullet. John then aimed at the man on the ground, intending to fire a second shot, but when he pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The gun had jammed. The remaining soldiers began firing back, and John retreated and ran across the fields, hearing the sound of helicopters sweeping the landscape looking for him. As he made it into a clump of bushes, one helicopter hovered just above him, and he was convinced that he was about to be riddled with bullets. But the helicopter kept going, moving towards the Irish border. John and his friend figured that the helicopters and soldiers would head to the Irish border, thinking the gunmen would try and escape across the border back into the Republic of Ireland, when in fact John was heading back to the farm in Northern Ireland. He never did find out if he killed that soldier or not, nor did I in my research for this episode. He posited that if the soldier did die, there was a chance that the British government could have covered it up, believing that they may have announced he died in a vehicle accident, so as not to give the IRA any PR at killing another soldier. John continued to operate in Northern Ireland throughout the early 80s until he was approached by Martin McGuinness and asked to go over to the USA to purchase arms. McGuinness believed that John wouldn't arouse as much suspicion in the USA because he had an American accent. John wasn't particularly happy about this.
I was approached and I was told to go to America because of an American accent. And I was stunned, really shocked that the IRA leadership or elements of the IRA leadership
didn't want to utilize your skills.
Yeah, the only asset that I had to give to the struggle was my accent. There was only 2 or 3 types of rifles we needed to buy. I mean, anybody could have done it. We had all kinds of guys in America with American accents who were Irish supporters who could have been told what to buy in a gun store.
Yeah,
they didn't need to send me, you know. And I just thought it very odd.
Over in Boston, John would end up coming into contact with Whitey Bulger, who was quite a significant and well-known organised crime boss. John recalls not really knowing anything about him or his reputation when he met him.
At that stage, I was introduced to Whitey Bulger. I didn't know who he was. You know, years later, when people often say to me, "How could you not have known?" Because they saw the movies and read the books. But there was no movies or books then. I wasn't from Boston. I'd never heard of Jim Bulger. I had no idea who the guy was.
He probably just it seemed like an imposing character, an imposing figure.
Well, he did. He said, I mean, I knew when somebody told me he could get me false driver's license and things like that, or might be able to, I knew immediately he was somebody who would break the law and, bend the rules. Yeah. But I mean, the stories that I'm hearing about him now, many, many years later, are chilling me as much as they chilled everybody else. He wasn't telling me that. He wasn't telling us what he was doing when he wasn't with us. I know a lot of people seem to find that hard to believe, but in the real world, that's how it was. There's a lot of
faces. There's a lot of different faces that are being shown to different people.
Yeah.
But what I thought was interesting was Patney sounds like an interesting character. He was very devoted to the Republican cause, I guess the way
he was. So I could never discern Whitey's real agenda in this, but Patney was.
That's the exact question I was going to go with. So Patney it makes sense that Patney was Republican, but what was Whitey just criminal?
Well. He was an ex-Marine as well, and so we had that connection too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I forgot you said that in the book. So yeah, why was Whitey involved? Was it just for pure criminality? Was it to have something to have over you? A favor owed?
I never really. You see, Whitey had donated stuff to the IRA in the past, maybe money and a few guns, but he never had a real close. He had no link to the IRA as such, and he had no real. I'd say the IRA, when they got guns from and stuff like that, wouldn't even know who the guy was.
Yeah.
But so he liked to boast maybe in South Boston that he'd help the IRA, things like that. But he wasn't making money on what we were doing over there. Certainly not. In fact, I reckon it cost him money. But I think he got kudos from being known to be somebody who helped the IRA.
Over the next few months, John was working to set up a large cache of weapons that he would eventually bring home. The plan was to hire a boat and transfer the weapons across the Atlantic to Ireland. But while he was in the middle of setting up this operation, he received a phone call from Ireland telling him to come home straight away with whatever weapons he had amassed. The caller also said that John should be on the boat as well.
And looking back on it, I mean, why didn't they tell you? See, I was able to travel. I was clean at the time. I wasn't known to the authorities. So I could have flown home. I could have been home the next day and talked to them, and what's the problem or what's the rush? But I get this call to come home now with everything I got and you be on the boat. Which, looking back on it now, put everything down the toilet. Do
you think that was that suspicious, or do you think that was because of some badly organized operation?
Deeply suspicious. I'm deeply suspicious of it, and because another thing is the material that I had on the Marina Anne it was all right, but a lot of it was just junk I'd gathered up because we hadn't really got the real sophisticated stuff we were.
You had like less than 100 guns or something, or what?
It would have made no difference to the IRA campaign. It would have made no difference. I mean, if I had this strategic arsenal and they were getting ready for some massive offensive and they needed it right away, I could understand it.
Yeah.
But there was no rush for this stuff. And even if we got it home, had we got it in, it wouldn't have made any difference to the IRA campaign. So the whole thing is, to me, a major mystery. Now, unfortunately, the man who gave me see, what happened was Liam Ryan, who was later shot dead by loyalists working on behalf of British military intelligence and IEC Special Branch, was the man who got me the message, and it was in a comm. It's just a folded up piece of paper. Liam didn't know what was in the message. And Liam had met several members of the leadership when he was home. And unfortunately, the way things worked at the time, I never asked Liam specifically who gave him the message for me. It's just the way, just didn't ask questions.
That's the nature of it, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if I'd have asked Liam, he'd have told me. If I'd have said, Liam, who gave you that? He would have told me. But I'm kicking myself to this day that I didn't ask Liam who gave you that to give me. So I didn't know. All I knew, it was a member of the leadership. It could have been one of half a dozen men.
So let's get a narrative weave in here. So right now you're basically being told that you need to come home in the middle of setting up your operation. So you fill a boat with a couple of people and you start heading home. But what you and look, eventually basically you're caught when you get to the Republic of Ireland. Yeah. But what you're positing here is that whoever gave the order was probably doing so because they wanted you to get nabbed, arrested. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I can't say that for sure, but I deeply suspect it because...
Or it's a very sloppy... But you see, the problem is, because what you've been saying is that the IRA was run a little bit all over the place. Maybe it could have just been the whim of some leader who was like, we need these guns now. That's kind of the two sides
but you see, they didn't need them now. There was nothing I had on that boat that they needed now. Nothing.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, it screwed up other operations. Because see, we had another boat. See, the Valhalla that we took across, we had to pay a fisherman money.
Yeah, it wasn't the right boat for the job, was it?
We had another boat we were working on, a much bigger boat, like a small freighter. And eventually that boat was also to bring stuff from Libya. That was the original plan, right? Mm. And all of that went down the tubes. So yes, I'm deeply suspicious. And unfortunately, God rest him, because he was a lovely, lovely guy. Liam Ryan was murdered when he was home in Tyrone. And so I never found out, and never will find out, who gave me that message.
They hastily prepared to leave. The ship they were planning on using to bring the arms over, the Surge, wasn't ready yet, so they set sail on a small fishing boat, the Valhalla. According to John, it was a small Gulf coaster shrimper, not designed for the North Atlantic. The men loaded in 7.5 tons of weapons, ammunition and accessories and set sail. On the journey, the boat did indeed receive quite a beating. The men sailed into a hurricane, and Bob Anderson, who was the fisherman who was in charge of the Valhalla, said it was the worst storm he had seen in 25 years. Despite some bumps and injuries, the men made it into Irish waters after 14 days and made contact with an Irish boat, the Marita Ann. The ships pulled up alongside each other, and it took the men 8 hours to transfer the arms from one boat to the other. But unbeknownst to the men, they were being watched. John was woken up on the Marita Ann the following morning on the 29th of September 1982 to a voice telling him, "Get up, we're being boarded." As it turns out, the entire operation was being monitored by security services, and John believes that there was a very high chance that the operation was foiled due to an informer. He is certain that Sean O'Callaghan informed on this operation, but believes there could have been others. O'Callaghan was a member of the Provisional IRA who worked against them from within, as an intelligence officer for the Irish Gardaí's special branch. John was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison for his involvement. It was in prison where he learned a lot more about the command structure of the IRA.
Yeah, everybody's jumbled in there, you see, and because it was compartmentalized so much on the outside, it was only really in jail, after years in jail, that I learned more about the IRA than I ever would have learned outside, because you kind of met everybody from every department and every command area. So yeah, and I did a full 10. I got 10 years, then I got 3 years for attempted escape.
For the escape, yeah.
With the basically in a nutshell, with remission and all, I went in September 84 and I came out in September 94.
I asked John if his views ever faltered after spending 10 years of his life in prison.
No, they strengthened, because I did an open university degree in politics and I studied a lot, and I studied politics and philosophy. And the more I studied, the more I came to the conclusion that Irish republicanism was the correct, was the correct take on the problems in Ireland. And I became it increased and enhanced my my determination and my belief in the Irish Republican struggle.
Upon leaving prison, John immediately re-enlisted in the IRA and began making plans for future operations in London. But it wouldn't be long before John would be back in prison again.
It was London. I wasn't sent over. I volunteered to go.
Oh, you volunteered to go? Okay.
They don't send you. I mean, you can't send somebody to England.
Yeah.
We came up with a plan to disrupt the electric grid as an economic and financial target against the British state.
And then, as you were in the process of setting it up, you realized, you were being followed.
Almost certainly informed on again.
Yeah. So everywhere you were trying to, there was nowhere.
Well, if you look at the operations, I believe I was informed on twice. First on the Marina Ann operation, and again in England. And these operations were known to only a very small handful of people at the top. So obviously something was wrong, seriously wrong in key crucial places.
On July the 2nd, 1996, John was sentenced to serve 35 years for his role in this operation. He was repatriated back to Ireland after 2 years as a result of the Good Friday Agreement, and was released in May 2000. In total, he has spent around 14 years of his life in prison. I again asked John what life was like for a person who has spent so much of their time as a paramilitary member or a prisoner.
I'm be honest with you, I'm not giving you false bravado when I genuinely say, from the bottom of my heart, I don't have any regrets, and I don't feel that I lost much of my life, because I learned so much too. I learned so much when I was in jail even. I didn't waste my time. Now, had I been a married man with a family, would have been a different story.
Yeah.
But, I didn't like jail, but I didn't waste my time there either.
But on the second time you came out of prison, because I don't think you really covered that in the book, what did your life become after that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I got a job in one of these European funded, ex-prisoner centers. And, for a long time, you see, when I speak about I have no problem in saying that I'm against the Good Friday Agreement, because I'm for the Irish Republic. But I do support the peace. It's the process I have an issue with. And, I didn't just come out of jail saying, oh my God, this is terrible, and the Good Friday Agreement is a sellout and all that. It took years for the penny to drop. And I stayed with the provost for a long time. And, as things started to develop and I began to see things, that just didn't gel with the Republican analysis. And I never heard talk about, getting rid of the British presence in Ireland anymore. In fact, they started talking about like it was the Unionists with the British presence, which Republicans never.
But my question is more so than that, is how did you have a life when you spent most of your life as a paramilitary and then as a prisoner? Well, so you're late 30s, and suddenly you have to start from nothing, from absolutely nothing.
Well, it was strange. Like I say in the thing, I had an aunt of mine in America left me 13,000 Irish pounds, and I had no bank account. I didn't know. Like, I was 37. I had never had a bank account. I'd never paid a utility bill. I'd never owned property. I'd never owned a car. I had never, the normal things, and like, I hadn't been involved in some very, unusual things in my life, but see the normal things in life, like paying
an electricity bill. Yeah.
I had no idea. I was more nervous about that than I was about going in active service. I swear to God, going into a bank to open up a bank account when I had no ID, no identification, no passport, no driver's license, no nothing.
What did you say in your book? You hadn't seen a dog or a cat in 10 years.
Well, when I was in jail for the first time.
The first time.
Or a child. I hadn't seen a child. And it's just strange, you eat on plastic plates, and then you get out to a lot of prisoners say their first meal, they burn their mouths because they're so used to the food being cold, know.
And well, that's the thing. Like I've chatted with a couple of people, but I just recently talked to an undercover British officer, and we actually met in person. But he actually cased the place I was meeting a couple of times, because though he's retired, he's never not undercover. And I'm wondering, is that the case with you as well, where you're either conscientious of surveillance, or you're just always? Do you think differently nowadays?
Not now. No, I'm not involved in anything, so I'm not. I don't.
But I mean, it's just hard for that mentality to leave your brain,
to an extent, of course, to an extent it would be, surely, there's always, I suppose, a bit of it there, and I'd always notice, undercover police and things like that. Sometimes they could be around, nothing to do with me, but it's something else. But I would spot them and things like that.
Stick out a sore thumb, yeah.
Whereas other people, they wouldn't have a clue. You know what I mean? There was times when I was involved in stuff where your radar is at full throttle, and you get almost a primordial sixth sense, almost like a hunted animal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you do. I mean, and to survive, and even with all that, you still sometimes don't survive. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. So you were out of prison. You're working with the kind of not a reconciliation or a post-prisoner outfit.
One of them. And I was teaching people computers and things like that. And I was, just learning as I went along. And I had a little bit of money for the first time. I was getting a paycheck, which wasn't much, but I'd never had money.
Yeah.
I'd never had. So to me, it was like, even though it was a small amount of money to most people, to me, it was like a fortune.
Oh yeah. Suddenly you have the freedom to buy food and cook dinner.
Like that. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. the normal things in life, you kind of take
for granted.
Yeah.
John ended up teaching a computer class to ex-Republican prisoners in the Irish county of Monaghan, and he's been living there since his release 22 years ago. This, in a way, is the end of John's story, which is essentially a shortened version of John's book. If you want to read the book, it's called The Yank: My Life as a Former US Marine in the IRA by John Crawley, and you can get it on irishacademicpress.ie. It's not quite the end of the story, though. John had a lot more to say, and was incredibly critical of the Republican movement. I'll explain a few of these takes now and specific questions I put to him. You can find the entire interview over on patreon.com/The Troubles Podcast. While talking to John about the Provisional IRA, John believed that at their peak, they were the greatest threat to British rule and jurisdiction in Ireland. But then he believed that they were compromised by the British government. I've talked about British informers many times, but John believes that there was a significant policy, an attempt from them to shape the IRA movement completely.
But at the time, they were the greatest threat to British rule in Ireland, and I think that was recognised across the board, including by the British. And that's why it was so critical to the British to shape the provisionals in a way that would bring them away from being a threat to being an asset.
And they shaped them by infiltrating them full of informers, or differently?
By infiltrating them, by killing the right people, jailing the right people, and buying the right people.
He believes that the likes of Sinn Féin are not representative of what he called enlightened republicanism. John is very critical of the Good Friday Agreement and believes that it keeps Britain permanently entrenched in Ireland.
In the British-Irish Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, it says very clearly that you can be British or Irish in the so-called United Ireland.
Okay.
Right? So it maintains the sectarian dynamic, it maintains the British-Irish cleavage, and it maintains institutional links with the British Crown to represent. I mean, even the other day, the Fianna Fáil politician O'Callaghan said that a United Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, you wouldn't necessarily have to have loyalty to the state. And they're also talking about maybe keeping the Stormont as a separate assembly, even within. So it's not really united. It's maintaining. You see, the whole purpose of the yes, the whole purpose of the Republican project was to break the connection with England. And remember, this was Irish Protestants who first came up with this. It was to break the connection with England and to forge a joint national civic identity as Republicans, as any other, normal democratic republic in the world. This Good Friday Agreement brings these divisions to the fore. It gives it democratic sanction, and it keeps them permanently entrenched in Ireland, basically forever, which I feel is disastrous.
So John is saying that the geography of Northern Ireland is a major strategic asset for the United Kingdom, so they would have no interest in ever giving it up. He then explains that because of the changing demographics in Northern Ireland, there is a chance that a nationalist majority could vote to leave the United Kingdom. He then claims that the British are using Sinn Féin to shape policy to suit their needs. This is quite an outlandish take, so remember, it is all from his perspective as a self-described enlightened Republican.
Now, anybody who thinks the Brits want out of Ireland and are only here for some altruistic reason to get the Irish people working together are living on a different planet, because Ireland is a major strategic asset for them. Ireland is their back door, it's their western flank, and they will always have an interest in this country. And they're thinking ahead. Brits play the long game, and they know that they can do a lot of things and can manipulate a lot of things. But one thing they can't manipulate or do anything about is the birth rate in the north. And unionists are only majority now in 2 of the 6 counties. So the Brits are looking ahead and they're thinking, how can we shape the strategic environment in Ireland to suit us well into the future? And having Sinn Féin at the forefront, arguing for this 2 nations dynamic, even in the so-called New Ireland, which is the old Ireland predicated in all the old divisions. What are they talking about? They're talking about getting rid of the national flag, getting rid of the national anthem.
Yeah, introducing a middle.
Bringing Ireland as a whole back into the Commonwealth. So far from leaving the North, what they're trying to do is use Sinn Féin, the Provosts, as partners to sort of re-enhance a sort of control through the whole 32 counties.
John also talked about the role of violence and his thoughts on what he was doing as a member of the Provisional IRA.
See so many of these people that said, would say that, I was morally wrong. to take up arms to defend Britain's arms against British armed aggression in this country are falling over themselves, congratulating people who are killing Russians in Ukraine. There's an awful lot of hypocrisy here. For example, the day after Russia invaded Ukraine, I heard a Fine Gael junior minister say that we have to defend the territorial integrity and freedom of Ukraine. A man who wouldn't dream of defending the territorial integrity and freedom of our country. The difference is one's safe and the other isn't safe. One will get you a political career and the other one will get you in prison. That's the difference.
The last question I put to John was if he would do anything differently looking back on his life. I'll let him finish the episode. Thanks, and see you next time.
Well, not personally, but I just regret that we didn't have a Republican leadership who really was on the same mission as us. See, to get anywhere in life, especially in a small resistance group with all the odds we had against us, you have to surround yourself with people on the same mission as you. I thought we were all on the same mission. Unfortunately, a few people at the top, not all of them, but a few critical people at the top were on a different page. And I wish I'd have known that.
If you are enjoying this podcast and want to support what I do, you can do so over at patreon.com/The Troubles Podcast. There you can hear the episodes early and ad-free, and I also release companion episodes from time to time, talking about recent developments in Northern Ireland. I'll be releasing my full interview with John over on the Patreon, which was significantly longer than what made it into this episode. In the most recent companion video, I also talked about what happened in Omagh in February, which saw a police officer shot multiple times by what is believed to be dissidents, but it is still unclear. You can also support the podcast by buying me a virtual coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/Troubles Podcast. If you want to support the podcast in other ways, simply tell your friends or leave a review. It all helps. Thanks again for listening and take care.